So we're going to have to wait for one more council member.
Mr. Walker?
Here.
Mr. O'Connor?
Here. Next items on the agenda this evening, or the first items on the agenda, are two proclamations regarding the J.C. Penney Company of East Brunswick. 560 participants were brought to the line in special buses. And whereas, due to the efforts of J.C. Penney Company of East Brunswick, 560 were treated to a picnic. And whereas, due to the efforts of J.C. Penney Company, every participant who signed up with the J.C. Penney Company received a T-shirt with the words, J.C. Penney joins hands across America. Claims of J.C. Penney Company in East Brunswick, under the leadership of William Sand Manager, Lynn Kowski, Security Manager, Dan Mazakowski, Merchandise Manager, and Mary. Bill is going to accept also the proclamation for Brunswick Square Mall, and I'd like to read that as well. Whereas Sunday, May 25th, 1986 was a special day in the United States, New Jersey, and Middlesex County, when Hands Across America and its tenants, free bus transportation was provided to bring participants to the line. And whereas due to the efforts of the management of Brunswick Square Mall of East Brunswick and its tenants, $2,000 was raised. And whereas due to the efforts of Brunswick Square Mall of East Brunswick, residents were given the opportunity to register for East Brunswick, its staff and tenants of the mall be recognized and thanked for their outstanding contribution to the success of Hands Across America. Bill, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is a discussion by Stan Fisher and
County to amend the solid waste plan to provide for a transfer station. This is one of 3 transfer stations that have been proposed so far for Middlesex County. It's a plan from United Disposal Corporation of Piscataway, and on the surface it looks very good, and you might ignore it. It's a good news, bad news kind of stations. It should lessen the traffic on Route 18. For those of you that don't know what a transfer station is, what it is it's a place where the garbage haulers bring their garbage, it's compacted and then sent on to the landfill in much larger container garbage. Now the particular one in Piscataway we know will be getting garbage from Somerset County. So far they've been pretty tight about what the percentage of it is, but it doesn't matter what the percentage of it is because they are not required to have scales. And if they're not required to have scales, they have to be very suspect about their data that they will be required. And we really don't know what's coming into it and where it's coming from. And so basically, I feel that the township should make a recommendation in time for this hearing that we would like to see all out-of-county garbage eliminated from this and any subsequent transfer stations. And it's
It was supposed to fill out sometime in the spring or summer of next year, and we're all on the alert for an application to expand it. And a rumor has reached us, there's not much we can do about rumors, that there will be no application for expansion of the landfill, but that the landfill is waiting for it to reach capacity, and then under an emergency situation, the DEP will come along and order it expanded without going through the application process. There's not a lot we can do except be on the alert right now. And go on record as opposed. Mr. Bush and I believe Mr. O'Connor have photographs that were taken on April 20th, which was a Saturday. You can see hardly any trucks there, but you can see uncovered garbage. Perhaps they ought to get the second golden garbage truck to do it. It is imperative that we monitor what the landfill is doing. Mr. Whitman has said, for example, that they are planning to redesign. We are suggesting that the township begin a program of aerial photography, such as a photo.
Each month now, it seems to be coming through at an accelerated pace. And Audrey Mantel. You want it shut down?
Oh, absolutely, we could. That would be
Is that
great.
what you want?
That would be great.
Well,
Yeah.
all you have to do is wait till March 31, and I understand it will be shut down.
From your mouth to God's
You're
ears.
a dreamer, Mr. Beck.
It won't happen.
Well, let me tell you what I can understand, by March 31st, the landfill is,
That's the gist of your questioning. I think what they are doing,
Don't
and
put
they don't,
words
and they
in my
don't,
mouth.
and
I
they
know
don't
I'm
have to
writing
do
that.
it. They are coming here to inform us, and it is up to the council
Let
to
me
take whatever
finish.
action it deems necessary.
Do you have some suggestions in a financial?
Divided over the 40,000 residents of this town, I would certainly pay it, because I don't want to have to worry about what that garbage is doing to me and my children. Fortunately for me, I don't live in the Pine Ridge tag I put on my health.
Sam, I don't necessarily disagree with you. All that I'm trying to say is, keep on hearing you tell us these things. I've been in your house, I even drank your coffee. All that I'm saying is, then in that regard, I will not agree to anything until I have a complete statement of the facts in writing, once and for all. Exactly where we're going, how much money we're in the hole, what is the crisis next year and the year after, and what our...
We will move on. Next item on the agenda is a discussion regarding farmland preservation.
Try to gain a better understanding of what role they might be able to
Right.
play in preserving farmland in the community. We have attempted to set up a time when Ms. Howe's schedule would conform with that of the council. This is the one we were able to find, and that's the reason she's here this evening.
You know, if you'd like to do it from there, you certainly can.
I'm associated, I'm on the faculty at Cook College. There's a new program that I am in the process of getting together. It's scheduled for Tuesday, December 9th at 7:30. The title of this program is called Coping with Garbage, Your Options. It is an educational program specifically designed to meet the needs of elected officials. It is totally objective, with experts from both DEP and the Extension Service being there to present all of the options, the pros and cons, with a panel discussion afterwards. You may want to put that on your calendar. I will be contacting you, but it is to deal with exactly the topic that was just presented.
Very good, thank you.
Presenting the issue of farmland preservation is not something that's easily done in a nutshell. It's an incredibly complicated issue. There are pros and cons to the way the present legislation is written. Farmers are sometimes against it and sometimes for it, depending on whether they want to stay in farming or whether they want to get out of it. One of the main advantages is it is a totally voluntary program. There are some aspects of the program that are more easily attainable than others. The initial steps to forming or to starting out with farmland preservation was the formation of a county agricultural development board. This board consists of both farmers and members of the community at large. I am an advisory member to that board. Right to Farm Act. And there would be exemptions from energy and water restrictions, which also could be overridden by the government, and again, they would have access to the special building zones. The easement sale is a main consideration here, and this is also an additional place where you as a township could come into play if you were really interested in preserving the farm. In addition to the criteria required to be in an agricultural development area, in order for a farmer to place his land in an 8-year preservation program, an 8-year preservation program means that he will keep his farmland in active agriculture for a minimum of 8 years. One criteria is that they have to have a minimum acreage of 10 acres. Now, the reason it was not, we went beyond the minimum requirements for farmland assessment, which is 5 acres, is that we were hoping to avoid the very tiny 6-acre lot with a house on it, so the house eliminates 1 acre there, from signing up by itself, being what we call sometimes a farm edge. It was chosen so that this way we would have at least 2 blocks of land together, and it does not all have to be owned by the same person, but you have to have a minimum of 10 acres. And the parcels must be contiguous at some point. They must touch. So that you've got 10 acres together. Now you've got something. 5 acres isn't a whole lot. It has to be 10 acres. And in order to be flexible, if somebody's got 9 acres by itself, the landowners may appeal to the Ag Development Board in order to waive the farm. So there's a certain amount of flexibility that we have built in. but we were hoping to get at least parcels of land that are 10 acres. There was also a question that came up as to whether all the land had to be in the same tax lot. That was not resolved. There was, it actually passed at the meeting, but there was one abstention, and there was one farmer who was on the board whose vote was necessary, and he was appealed to afterwards and chose to abstain and wished to be present at further discussion. So the absolute criteria for going into an 8-year preservation program is still slightly questionable, but the process of first applying for an ADA is certainly a feasible step at this point in time of approval. It would then forward that back to the County Ag Development Board and also to the County Planning Board. And at that point, once we know there's been an ordinance passed, that you have approved this, that we could then go on to approve the petition of the individual farmers. Now, if you look...
I'm involved in this. Was locked into this for 8 years. Say the Turnpike Authority or the municipal government or some governmental body wants to run a road through there. They would be prevented from doing that for 8 years. Is that not correct?
It's a definite possibility. There is a governor override, but it's been interpreted.
Between the farm value and the development value. Now, at the end of the 8 years, when this program expires, then what happens?
If the person sells its development easements, it becomes a deed restriction. But if you do not sell that easement,
The law firm of Burley Castle Case, who are serving as special counsel to the township in this matter. I'm accompanied by Dr. Frederick Kessler, who is our noise expert, Jeffrey Green, who is our traffic expert, and Daniel Gutman, who's our air quality expert. I've been asked to just briefly summarize the results of their studies, and these gentlemen are available to answer your questions. I'd like to talk about 3 topics very briefly. First, what they've included concerning the need for an expansion. Secondly, what they have included regarding the impacts of an expansion. And finally, where we currently stand in the legal process. In terms of the need for the expansion, our consultants' conclusions are that the Turnpike Authority has greatly overstated the need for an expansion of the Turnpike. When in traffic engineering, one makes projections about future traffic growth based on a straight line projection of what past experience has been, particularly when past experience has been one of high growth, that tends to overestimate the future need for the project. In this case, they have not only taken a straight line, but they have estimated an even higher degree of traffic growth that would be justified by that methodology. A much preferable methodology would be to relate the traffic growth projections to projections as to growth in population and economic activity. The draft environmental impact statement, the DEIS prepared by the Turnpike Authority, did not do that, and for that reason, among others, we think that they overestimated the future growth in traffic on the Turnpike. Additionally, there is reason to believe that the Turnpike has a greater traffic carrying capacity than most other roadways with a comparable width and size, because the Turnpike is very straight, it has wide lanes, it has very few entrances and exits, and therefore it seems to have a high capacity per lane mile, which means that if there's more traffic that's generated, you don't need to widen it so much in order to handle that traffic. Moreover, the environmental impact statement did not relate the widening projections to any need to widen the access roads or the interchanges, which could serve as a constraint. The bottom line on the need for an expansion is that a case could be made. I'm not going to argue this case, but a case could be made that one could justify an expansion from the current 6 lanes to 8 lanes. One could not very easily justify an expansion beyond 8 lanes to 10 lanes, and certainly not anywhere beyond 10 lanes. Even if one does believe the numbers that are in the environmental impact statement, an expansion from 8A to 9, as is now projected, may not be effective in relieving traffic, because there's no expansion further south between 8 and 8A, which could serve as a bottleneck. And therefore, under either scenario, the projections of the Turnpike Authority for traffic don't work. In terms of the effects of the highway, that breaks down into, in our study, air quality and noise. On air quality, we found major problems with the carbon monoxide impact analysis. The most important, perhaps, is that the vehicle speeds, which were assumed by the Turnpike Authority, assumed a minimum speed of 30 miles per hour. However, if you were to believe the Turnpike Authority's traffic projections, the speeds might go down to 15 or 20 miles per hour at certain times, which would mean much more air pollution, because the slower the speeds, the higher the emissions. Secondly, the Turnpike Authority assumed much more dispersion in the atmosphere, that the air pollution would disperse to a greater extent than it probably will, which means that they have underestimated the accumulation of that air pollution in the atmosphere immediately around it. They have underestimated the background levels of carbon monoxide because they have ignored the effect of surrounding traffic growth on the level of carbon monoxide in the area. There are numerous computational difficulties in their analysis, without getting into any details unless you would like me to expand on it. They used the wrong algorithm in their computer model with respect to speeds. They used the wrong factors in converting from 1 hour impacts to 8 hour impacts, and there are a number of other errors in their analysis. The total effect of all of this is that they have considerably underestimated the impact of the highway on air pollution levels. Finally, on the subject of noise, the Turnpike Authority relies heavily on noise barriers as a method of mitigating the impacts of noise on the surrounding areas. Noise barriers can be somewhat effective on houses that are right on the other side of the barrier, but their effectiveness rapidly diminishes as you go beyond that first row of houses. And it's not easy to really project that the barriers will have a major impact on abating noise beyond that first row of houses. Calculating the effect of the barriers on even the first row and certainly beyond is very difficult for a number of reasons. For us, it's particularly difficult because the Turnpike Authority has failed to provide us with the backup information, their calculations, the models they've used, the inputs to the models that they've used that are necessary in order to double check on their computations. Some of the double checking that we have been able to perform makes us very dubious about the results for a number of reasons. One is that they seemed to make their observations of noise levels at odd hours and then use a number of mathematical manipulations to convert that into the peak traffic hours or the peak noise hours, which introduces a great element of uncertainty and approximation. They underestimated the height of some of the sources of noise, particularly the heights of the trucks, which is an important input into the model. The height of the exhaust from the trucks tends to be a lot higher than what they calculated in the model, and therefore the barriers will be that much less effective because the heights of the exhausts may go above the barriers. There was no real impact study done at all of the construction noise. This is a major construction project which could extend over a period of years. There was no analysis in the EIS as to just how much noise that will create over what period of time. There was inadequate sampling of monitoring of noise to figure out just what the noise levels were at different distances from the highway. We are, with the assistance of volunteers from the community, trying to make some of our own noise measurements to add to the number of data points so we can come up with a more precise calculation as to the impacts that the highway would have and the impacts that barriers would or would not have.
The northern end and the southern end. What they said is they're redesigning the southern end, the East Brunswick, and to take it out of the jurisdiction of the Corps of Engineers, and for that reason the Corps need only look at the northern end. We think that that is wrong, both as a matter of fact and as a matter of law, and we've written a number of letters indicating that if the Corps and the Coast Guard agree with this and take the position that the northern end and the southern end should be considered jointly, the next step after the scoping session is the actual preparation of the environmental impact statement. According to internal schedules of the Corps and Coast Guard, which we obtained under the Federal Freedom of Information Act, that process would take a minimum of 2 years before the Corps and the Coast Guard would be in a position to make any decision on whether to grant the permits for the project. It could well take longer than that. At the end of that stage, they would make a decision on the permit, and those, if they were to grant the permit, those decisions could be challenged in court. If the Corps and the Coast Guard instead decide to grant the Turnpike Authority's request to segment the northern segment from the southern segment, the Turnpike Authority may then proceed directly to seek approvals from the State Department of Environmental Protection. That in itself is a complicated process because New Jersey has a fairly elaborate set of environmental statutes and standards, and we've had communications with the Department of Environmental Protection, and they have assured us that they will very rigorously review any permit applications from the Turnpike Authority. Well, that concludes my very brief summary, and we would all be happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have questions? Right.
Yeah. What type of, how do you estimate the pollution in the area opposed to the way the Turnpike Authority use different,
Talking about the air pollution,
yeah,
Dan Gutman, our air quality expert, would you like to address that?
Well, one of the main problems that I found with their analysis, the biggest problem in the analysis of this area is that they misuse the computer program, that the Environmental Protection Agency's computer program, in such a way that the emissions of carbon dioxide are 3 times higher than what they were using. So that alone is probably the biggest mistake they made in this area, which means that the resulting concentrations that they came up with are only a third of the amount they should be. Now another problem is that if you believe their projections of traffic, there's going to be a bottleneck between exit 8, interchange 8, and interchange 8A, which means that the traffic through that section will be very slow. It will stop and go traffic, and that they didn't consider at all. In other words, their study was only north of interchange 8A, so that there's a whole section between 8 and 8A which is generating a lot of pollution, which will blow into the northern part, which they didn't consider. Now, I haven't myself done that calculation, but that would mean that there's a lot of pollution coming from the south, carbon dioxide that is not even been looked at.
Is there any instrumentation that's used to test?
Most of it
is done by computers.
It's done by computers, for the most part. It's based to some extent on measurements of background concentration that exist today, and there are monitors that the state has in place in certain areas with good background numbers. But as far as the future is concerned, it's all done by computers.
Yes.
Right.
I have the same question on the noise.
Dr.
Well, we do have instruments that measure noise, and we are measuring the noise, and the Turnpike consultant also measures the noise. We're repeating some of their measurements, one, to just check on their numbers, and so far the numbers that we've obtained agree with the numbers that they've obtained. But we are taking it a step further, since we have to use a computer also. We want the computer to reflect as accurately as possible what the sound level emission is further from the turnpike than just the first house or the adjacent locations that the turnpike consultants use. So we are embarking on a program where the sound level measurements are going to be made simultaneously at some distance from the turnpike and close to the turnpike. So we can get the the propagation concept, if you want to call it that, propagation relationships. We will, when sufficient data is obtained, and I feel confident that we'll eventually get all the needed inputs that we will need to make the computation. But the computation, the computer computations we'll make will reflect what the turnpike is contributing to the community sound. The biggest problem after that is to try to predict as accurately as possible what the noise reduction effect of barriers might be to the sound that the turnpike is providing.
Take into consideration, like, different days you have different atmospheric pressures, different days you have different sedan winds, which would either exaggerate effect on one day and minimize it on another day.
That's correct. Those are very good points. Those are very good points, and we are doing this with some very good volunteers from the township who are making the measurements using borrowed equipment when they can. They have been advised not to make measurements when the weather humidity is too high, when the wind is blowing too high, not to make measurements in the rain. We're trying to minimize the extremes, but your point is well taken. Sound transmission is a function of atmosphere.
They have those instruments now in their homes, volunteers.
Do you have the instruments in your homes now? Yes, sir.
They're in place.
They're in place. They've been doing it for a few months now. Using the same computer model. We will use the same computer model. So that model can be adjusted somewhat to look at various other what I think are important considerations. A good example is that the computer model considers that the truck noise emission sits about 8 foot above the roadway. And you've seen these trucks going down the highway where the stack is much higher than 8 foot above it. And so what you do is you look at what if, you do some what if kind of things. What if the stack is 12 foot and you have a barrier that's 15 foot, what is the noise reduction? And kind of things like that. So we have some work in that direction.
First for Mr. Kessler and Mr. Gutman. In the memo from July 24th, letter report, you make reference to the base against which the Turnpike Authority has made its projections. Uses a 10 dB change as an impact criterion, but the Turnpike Authority is rated in these sound levels. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, if we were writing an environmental impact statement for the Turnpike, right now it's virgin territory or community sitting there would be a certain sound quality associated with East Brunswick, which would have a certain sound level based on the population density, local activity, etc. We would then say, okay, now this turnpike is going to come through, I'm going to make all of these calculations, and I'm going to predict what the change is going to be. And because it's the turnpike is going to be a big, healthy highway, the character of this community will change. It will change from, we'll say, an average sound level of 50 to 65. And you make a judgment. Shall we allow this to take place if we're degrading the community by 15 decibels, or shouldn't we? I just use 15. It might have been down to 40, because some communities are. They're more pristine. The Federal Highway Administration criteria for the change in sound levels is 10 decibels. And if I were cutting a bypass for this road around something or other through pristine area, the impact criterion says I have to watch out and I have to design noise control if it changes more than 10 decibels. Besides the other criterion, which says I can't exceed 67 decibels. And all I said in my little note there is that when they're taking the 10 decibels, they're taking the 10 decibels from what's existing now. which is of course somewhat degrading. And they're adding a criterion, they're saying to themselves, well, I can allow 10 more decibels. But of course, they have another place to cut off. They have 67 decibels to cut off. So one is working against the other. But I thought it was cute that they mentioned the 10 decibel criterion in an area where it's already degraded. That was right.
And on the air quality, there was a lengthy discussion of air quality north of exit 11, I think it was. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit?
You want to know why I focus on that?
Well, or summarize it, or...
Yeah, all right. Again, if we accept the Turnpike Authority's traffic projections, which we think, both I and Mr. Green think are exaggerated, but if we accept them as fact, they show that the demand for the traffic demand is much higher than the capacity of the roadway, both north of here and south. And I looked at the area north to see what that meant for the air pollution impact. And because it means that because the traffic demand is so high, the road will be over capacity at the peak hours, which means that traffic will be stop and go. There'll be a lot of air pollution further north, and it is likely that the national air quality standards for carbon monoxide will be violated in Elizabeth. That violation cannot be allowed because they cannot. They have to meet these air quality standards, and I believe that if the expansion of the turnpike will cause this violation, which I think will happen, then they may not be permitted to expand the turnpike through Elizabeth. If they cannot expand the turnpike through Elizabeth, that means that there's less traffic. Less traffic will be able to come to this area, and the expansion in this area will not be required.
Now, am I hearing correctly that if their traffic projections are correct, they violate the air quality standards?
Right.
But if their traffic projections are greater than what the true traffic picture is, they don't need to widen. Or if they
don't need it here. I mean, it may mean that the traffic projections are such that they have more. They're projecting more traffic than the turnpike will be able to carry further north. But that traffic still has to reach East Brunswick in order to justify widening East Brunswick. If it can't get through a bottleneck in Elizabeth, then it won't be here in East Brunswick, and there's no need to widen the turnpike here.
Additionally, we haven't talked about the water quality issues, but under the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, you can't allow more filling in wetlands than is necessary, and therefore you can't widen the highway through wetlands more than the traffic projections would justify.
I interrupt a second. Can we just have your name for the record for the minutes?
Dan Gutman.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of them. You had mentioned earlier that the turnpike wanting to sever the northern section from the southern section. Can you explain again what your efforts are and what you think your likelihood of success will be to keep it as an entity, and why do you want to do that?
We think that it's important to recognize the reality that the northern expansion and the southern expansion are one unified project. They're unified in terms of traffic planning, unified in terms of processing of permits, and perhaps most importantly, they're unified in terms of finance. The Turnpike Authority would like to separate them out so that the Corps of Engineers would and the Coast Guard would, I think, they both have blinders on and look only at the impact on the northern end and not at the impact on the southern end. And that the southern end could be processed wholly by the state. We think that if the southern end is processed wholly by the state, even then it faces major obstacles at the state level and at the judicial level. But it would be preferable to have the whole highway process together. We have written formal letters to the Corps and the Coast Guard setting forth at some length why we think the segmentation would be illegal, since it would be a violation of the National Environmental Policy Act because of the interdependence of the northern segment and the southern segment. When the scoping session occurs, if the Turnpike Authority continues to
request a segmentation, we will at that session again vigorously oppose it.
Jerry, can I ask you?
Sure, go ahead.
If the Army Corps decides that the southern segment is not within its jurisdiction, if in effect the turnpike succeeds in segmenting, do you have any recommendations to the township at that point?
I would recommend that the township continue, if the township is of a mind to continue to oppose the project, there are numerous legal options available for it to continue to do that. That's both at the state level and at the federal level, because we believe that even at the southern end, permits are required by the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Corps has to give full consideration to that segment.
Earlier, Mike, I think you said that one could, although you weren't attempting to, but one could justify possibly going from 6 to 8 lanes, but not more than 8. Up until what year would 8 lanes be good, even by their standards and their numbers?
Jeffrey, you want to?
Using the turnpike's projection rate, which is about 2.5% per year compounded, they need 10 lanes around 1994 based upon their projections. But we took a look at their actual dot points of traffic. This is a blow-up of a graph that we were provided by the turnpike, and we superimposed upon it something that I'd like to explain it to you. These points that you see here are data points. They're average daily traffic for each year of the turnpike from 1975 to 1985. This is an actual point, although 1985 point was not used in the turnpike's computations because they had done their work before this data was available. What the turnpike did, they connected all the actual points and then projected some kind of straight line at about a 2.5% rate. So you can see that it goes up fairly steeply. There's a trough here during the energy crisis and a trough here during the early 70s when there was a slight stagnation in the economy. And it picks up very rapidly over the last several years when the economy has picked up very rapidly. Well, in doing traffic projections, it's been my experience that a straight line projection based on as much historical data as possible would yield a generally conservative view. In other words, usually be on the high side. If I was to appear in front of this council representing a developer, I probably would take a look at a straight line projection and I would tell you it's on the high side, and I would purposely make it there because I wanted to present a worst case. But in this case, I want to try and find as actual a case as possible. Failing to understand how the population and employment data was worked through the turnpike's computations, and failing to understand exactly how the computations included the various developments that they cited, I drew a regression line. And that's a mathematical process which, by the method of least squares, puts a straight line projection to the points where, by math, it should go. And if you look at the numbers, at 2004, they've estimated about 142,000 vehicles per day using the turnpike in East Brunswick area. That's a lot of traffic. And on their calculations, and I don't dispute them, justifies the 10 lanes. Using the regression at 2004, I estimated approximately 118,000 vehicles, difference of about 24,000 vehicles per day. 24,000 vehicles per day is a pretty hefty sum, and some of your local roads, not many of them have that amount. Well, what that means is that's about several lanes worth of traffic in there. I did a volume capacity analysis to try and relate the capacity of the turnpike to this volume at the various number of lanes. And the direct question was, how many lanes, or when do they need the 10 lanes? And my estimation is not till they get past, at least past the year 2000, and perhaps not until they pass 2004, the 20-year design period. It's just not needed now. On the other hand, approximately 1994, they begin to need 8 lanes. Traffic begins to grow, and there's a clear need, and they really should be planning for that type of expansion at this time. So it's my opinion that by the end of 2000, 8 lanes, by the year 2004, 8 lanes should be sufficient at level service C, level service, the high end of level D, which is not unreasonable, which is acceptable for an urban expressway, which the turnpike is rapidly becoming.
If I can understand this, do you agree, or are you saying that the turnpike would need 8 lanes by 1994?
Yes.
And that is the lower line, the dotted line?
The dotted line represents my traffic
Right.
projections based upon the regression analysis.
But when you say that the turnpike would need 8 lanes by 1994, what line on the graph are you looking at?
The dotted
The
line.
bottom, okay. Is there any explanation for that straight line projection that they come up with?
This one here?
Yeah.
I believe they made an honest opinion based on their experience. They put together the data that they had. It's just that they didn't do it in a mathematical way. They haven't revealed to us the math that they've used. So it's very difficult for me to confirm or deny the validity of what they've done.
All right, that point 1994 then, the solid line, is that representative of 10 lanes?
Maybe 10 lanes about this point. It's a little greater than that. The line is around 117,000, something in that neighborhood. It's very hard when you look at average daily traffic.
Combined in EPA criterion, which says that in order to protect the public health and welfare, the special average sound level shouldn't be more than 55 decibels. Now I wouldn't even write it down because it's so extreme. Most of the United States is above 55 decibels. So the EPA, when they were active in noise control, took another look at it and they said, well, maybe what our short-term goal should be is to reduce America, particularly urban America, to 65 decibels as a short-term goal, and sure, we'll hope for 55 decibels in the future. The Federal Highway Administration took a different tack. At one time, they were talking even higher levels, but they got convinced down to 67 decibels. The Department of Housing and Urban Development accepted the EPA criterion of 65 decibels. Today, you cannot use public money, HUD money, to build a housing development in any area where the special day-night average sound level exceeds 65 decibels. But you can build a highway in a residential area and exceed the 65 decibels. So the two agencies, what I'm showing is the two agencies of the government have a somewhat small conflict. While 65 decibels for an urban area is considered acceptable by HUD and EPA standards, if you go and talk to people who live in those areas, they don't find the sound quality that acceptable. There are a lot of factors which affect what people do. Many people don't complain when they are annoyed. Some people complain too much when they aren't annoyed. So it's a complicated issue. The criterion that the Federal Highway Administration uses, which the Turnpike adopted, is 67 decibels during the peak traffic hour, which relates to what we call a day-night average sound level of 67 decibels. I feel that's a bit too high. The predictions that they made, well, the measurements that they made, the measurements we made, show that already the neighborhoods, the communities neighboring the Turnpike exceed 67 decibels and have probably exceeded 67 decibels for many, many years. The new Turnpike construction will increase the sound levels to the neighbors nearby unless they do some mitigation. And the mitigation they're suggesting is the barriers. And the barrier mitigation is
exceed 67 decibels, you have to do something. And one of the things that you do is put up highway noise barriers. And as Mike said earlier, those barriers will provide noise control for those neighbors who abut the barriers, but much less effectiveness as you go further. And it's a very complicated computation because now you've got houses in the way and trees in the way. And so we're trying to get a handle on it. Thank you. I didn't think he asked me that question.
I thought I heard it.
Well, why don't you answer this question? Yeah, right. I thought he
You
was
said
asking me
it
about.
exceeds 67, and it shouldn't exceed 67.
So
where is it?
Okay, I'm going to tell you. First of all, there are some data in the document, but I'm going to tell you what these excellent volunteers have come up with. They went through sampling routines, and I'll just read off some average sound levels that they have found at locations near the turnpike, without saying exactly where the locations are, for a half hour of measurement during peak traffic hours. 74.3, 74.1. Here's one. I said we're measuring close to the highway and further from the highway. So some that are further from the highway, 62.7. 16 feet from the turnpike fence, 78.8. There's a few more.
You said though that it exceeds 67, there's supposed to be some sound barriers there. Is that something new that has to happen with future construction? Or if it's that there now, and something be done to make them put something there now so it's not that high?
Well, they don't come under the jurisdiction of the Federal Highway Administration anyway. So they're using that as guidelines. And I certainly can't speak to the issue of whether you can force them to do anything now.
You could argue either side of that.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
If you have a sound level of, let's say, 65 decibels, 20 feet away, occurring at point X, and you're taking the measurement 20 feet away, for the sake of argument, and it's 75 dBs. And then you introduce another, I don't know what the sound level of a truck is, but let's say another 20 or 30 dBs, but that sound source is another 70 feet away. Now, do you add the 2 decibel levels, or what do you have at the same point of measurement?
Okay, it's a little complicated, as most of these physical things are. Let's, instead of talking about sound levels, decibels, what we basically are adding is the energy emitted by source 1, which was, I forget how many feet away, to source 2, which is how many feet away, I don't know. Take the total sound energy and convert it into a sound level. Now,
Describe sound energy.
yeah.
Easily.
No. Let me do this. If you can try to picture a balloon, okay? The balloon is like the wavefront of sound. And if I take all my energy and get it into the balloon and it's got a small diameter, all that energy is a small diameter, the balloon is pretty thick. Therefore, the sound level is pretty high. Now, let me expand that balloon, okay? With the same energy that I started out with, the skin of the balloon, because it's expanded, is a lot thinner, okay? And the sound pressure level is lower. Because I've taken the same sound energy that I started with and I've distributed it over a larger surface, okay? So if I have a source of sound, we'll make it pretty simple. If I have a source of sound that I know is 50 decibels at 10 feet, okay? I know because of the physics that at 100 feet it's going to be 30 decibels. Or if I go from 10 feet to 20 feet, I'm going to reduce it by 6 decibels. This is the physics of it. I've expanded that balloon, so to speak, so the density or the thickness of the balloon surface is thinner out further from the source of the sound. I hope it's helpful.
What we're talking about, of separating this particular segment of the road from the federal review. If this road is separated, we will then be at the mercy of the State Department of Environmental Protection. We all know what the State Department of Environmental Protection has done to us in the garbage situation. And let me review some history about in this last few months with the turnpike in the state. On April 16th, after Mr. Gerard's efforts, the federal agencies decided to review this project instead of the turnpike basically reviewing itself. And the turnpike stated, "We were delighted that these three federal agencies elected to get involved. It will create the impression that it will correct the impression that we report only to the governor. Everyone admits that the federal government is an independent agency not controlled by the Turnpike Authority." Several days after that statement was made, they applied to the government to segment this and get out from under the federal review. We know that in June, the Turnpike and the State Department of Transportation made an agreement reducing the scope of the project from 12 lanes to 10 lanes. The State Department of Transportation made this agreement without making a decision on Route 92. Route 92 is the connector road that is supposed to be built from Princeton Route 1 area to the Turnpike, an east-west road. And there's a dispute on where it should go, on whether it should go into exit 8, exit 8A, or in the latest information is even the Department of Transportation is considering not doing it at all. And therefore, they made this decision without this input. And obviously, if the road, if Highway 92 is built to exit 8, then it makes a very good argument for expanding the road down to exit 8, etc. All I'm saying is that we have to rely on the wiles and the ability of our attorney so that we will get an impartial review, because I think we will if the federal people do review this particular segment. And on behalf of the committee, the ad hoc committee, I'd like to thank the council again for its support and hope that you will continue to give us the support. Thank you.
Which would consist of 21 members. The task force that originally met has recommended that those members that served originally as the task force would like to continue as founding members of this new corporation. But we are also asking the Township Council to designate 2 members of their board or someone of their choosing to also be present on the task force. We have asked the mayor's office for his recommendation. We have asked the East Brunswick Association for Brain Injured Children for 2 members. We have asked the head of the clergy council or his designee, 1 member of the Board of Education, the head of special police or
designee. I know that Councilman Murray has served on the task force, and he has indicated to me that he would like to continue as an official member of the corporation in its form. And if you have any recommendation regarding yourself, let us know. I certainly would like to be a part of it. If you would like.
Why do you
Keep coming in and out, so I'm not sure what point.
No, I'm talking about what was said at the table. Would you fill me in what was
We're
said?
talking now about
was in the packet, was distributed in the packet.
a letter dated July 1st. It's addressed to me. It's from Betty Kiss, to be members of the board.
Well, before I give an opinion, I'd like to get an up-to-date list as to who belongs to who and to what. I'm very confused. I believe that there seems to be an unequal division of duties, so if I can request it, I respectfully request such a list.
I'm not sure I know what kind of list you're looking for.
I'd like to know whoever is being served. Apparently,
To watch how the monies are spent. And presumably, that's the
But in addition, they were to construct the intersection of Cranberry and Riders Lane with improvements to Brunswick Avenue and Cranberry Road. There has been a lot of slippage in where that project would fit. It was supposed to coordinate directly with Phase 2 of Riders Lane, which we opened up on Saturday, the first part of it. And so that in October we have full road operating. As I point out in my memo, unless we do something, the slippage is so bad at this point, we will have a road in place with no intersection. So what I'm suggesting is that after conversations with the county, they have agreed verbally, and I'm pursuing something in in writing from them, to reimburse us for installing the traffic signals that would be installed under the Cranberry Road widening. We would do that at this time since they are designed and approved by DOT, put them in on, for something less than $146,000. That was the first cost I got from our contractor presently on phase 2, and we have some negotiations to bring that down. That would be done now. We get all the underground work out of the way. The lights would be in and operating by October, so that there would not be a disruption once we open the roadway. Included in that, if we go further with our contractor, would be some of the other underground work, such as the drainage. But other than that, we had tried to, and I had talked to the county, and they seemed receptive to it, to place the entire contract in, the entire intersection in our contract. However, it exceeds $400,000 the work, and again, the county would have reimbursed the township for doing the work. But our contract with phase 2 contractor has a maximum flexibility of about $240,000 that we could add before we reach our cap on our contract. So for that reason, we can't pursue that, but we will pursue, if you are so inclined, having the traffic signals installed so they're operating. They will, of course, look slightly out of, say, it's strange because they'll be so far off the road, the arms will extend onto the roadway, but they'll be set so far back because they will be anticipating the widening of the roadway sometime late this year or early next.
Kurt, when do we need to do this?
Reimbursement basis. We are looking for a change order. We need a change order at the meeting of August 11th. And that change order is to contract with Honorado Construction, who's doing phase 2 of the Riders Lane work. Right now, we're just asking for the change order.
I think that
Quick cash flow, I think. It's not something that's going to extend out for any great length of time. I don't see anything wrong with it.
No, I have no problem with it.
there was some delay on their
Well,
part.
I'm not blaming the county, but it was, it was said, whether it's the county or the state, and I'm sure they had some, they're responsible for it, so that's not part of it.
Any comment? Is there any comment from the public? Mr. Weil.
David Weil, Chip Committee, has some slight infelicities in it, and it wasn't subject to editing by the committee or by others, so I would just like it to be clear that the committee is not recommending a sole source purchase from a particular company. It is recommending that the appropriation be authorized for the acquisition of a computer and related software, not the computer. I may make that distinction because when this is enacted, and it's not clear to me that you could vote on this tonight.
You can't.
There is still a bidding process that is necessary for the software, and there will, along with the hardware for state contractors, will come back to the council again to approve the purchase or the selection of the bidders or the state contract vendors, and to approve the purchase at that time. So tonight we're just considering the authorization of the funding in the public hearing. The second slight error, there are 2 other errors that have to do with equipment that do not reflect on the budget. The budget is correct as presented. That correctly reflects what the department had suggested and what the committee reviewed. At the bottom of the first page,
Are you looking at the ordinance, David?
excuse me, I'm looking at my memorandum dated July 23rd. At the bottom of page 1, the cost of the additional megabytes in the third disk pack is net 2016. That was already less 10%. It's a misunderstanding on the part of the borough's representative who answered a question at our meeting last Monday night. And on at the end of the first paragraph on page 2, we had a further misunderstanding.
I have to have a mover and a seconder, please.
Yes, you do.
I'll move all those excluding whatever those numbers are.
B, D, F, and R.